One plugin that I've been getting asked about a lot is Soothe2 from a company called Oeksound. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And Soothe2 is a very interesting plugin that's unique and different from others. You might actually recognize it from some of my past videos, such as the EQ Alternatives You Should Know About video that I dropped last week. But if you didn't know, Soothe2 is essentially a dynamic resonance suppressor. And what that means is it's basically a smart type of EQ that's able to recognize when certain frequencies have just built up too much and become too loud or problematic in a mix, and it'll automatically reduce them, but only when they become too problematic. And of course, the way that it knows this is going to be based on the settings that you set up in the first place. Well, if you're somebody who's considering getting Soothe, maybe you've never used it before, or if you're somebody who just got it and want to learn more about how to use this plugin effectively, I'm going to show you in today's video. Are you ready? Let's go. Yo, what's up? This is your boy 5-Piece, producer and engineer extraordinaire. Thank you for checking out today's video. I appreciate you for tuning in here. Today's video, we're going to talk about Soothe2. So if you're somebody who's completely new to Soothe, or if you want to learn a little bit more about this plugin and how to use it to sound better in your mixes, this is the perfect video for you. So with all that being said, let's get on to Pro Tools and I'll show you what's going on. First things first, let's play through this. Keep in mind that this is at the very end of my chain after all of my processing. And the goal of this plugin for me is to handle harsh resonances, to take care of these harsh frequencies that are a little bit too overbearing, especially things like sibilants and T's and CH's and just stuff like that, stuff that's going to really poke out on the eardrum. And I do find that it's a little bit better at treating higher end problems. However, you can absolutely use it on the low end as well. Let's just check this out soloed right now.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So hopefully you notice that really this is affecting those key sibilant phrases. What to say, right? The T and the S kind of going into each other from to say. Pass the, right, past the J, but past the S to the T. These transitional sibilant parts is especially what this is treating, and that's what I really wanted this to focus on. And again, it's at the end of my chain after all kinds of stuff, after a bunch of boosts and saturation and other things. So I'm just using this as that cherry on top to keep things in check. And while it is very subtle, it is definitely making a difference and making sure that those phrases are less harsh and less in your face, less painful, really. So let's break down how to think about using this plugin, starting with some of these parameters, okay? I'm really going to focus on this section and this section. These are global parameters that really apply to everything, but then of course we can go in a little bit deeper and talk about specific frequencies from there. And don't forget that I will be showing you how to actually set this up yourself. Before I do that, I want to make sure you understand these parameters. For your convenience, I'll leave some chapter markers throughout this video so that way you can just jump ahead if you don't want to hear me talk for a bit about these parameters. Right now, let's first talk about the settings, soft and hard. Before I go deeper here, pause. Soft is the setting that I'm usually on, okay? Soft is a lot more transparent. I find it's easier to adjust, and it's just a little bit more well-rounded, better suited to a lot of different types of material, whereas hard is a very specific and aggressive type of sound. It's definitely more adjustable, and you can push it a little bit more aggressively compared to soft without getting some negative attributes, because sometimes when you push this too far, you'll get a really metallic, phasey type of sound, and we don't want that. Of course, we want this to sound transparent, but in hard mode, you might be able to push things a little bit more aggressively without having those negative repercussions. Between the two, I find I'm on soft most times. I find, again, it's just better suited to more material, but you may want to use hard on a situation where you have a really, really aggressive sound, maybe some cymbals or hi-hats that have a lot of piercing high-end energy, maybe a violin that has a really muddy kind of mid-range, all different types of scenarios. But I would say when they're more aggressive or noticeable problems, you may want to be in hard mode. Soft mode is going to be a little bit more transparent for you. Now, depth is pretty much the first setting you're going to set up after setting the mode. And depth refers to how much processing is applied. Basically, how much volume are we really going to lose? How aggressive are we going to lose volume, right? If I have a long depth or a deep depth like this, you see it's already working even when there's really nothing playing through the channel, right? And this is maybe just noise from another plugin on the channel, but nonetheless, you see it's aggressively working and right away reducing stuff, right? Whereas right here, it's not really doing a damn thing. And obviously, if I go even less, it's going to be doing even less. Depth is really just how much volume are we going to lose over time. And the higher you set it, the more aggressively it's going to work. And then to the left is going to be a lot more transparent. For me, I'm personally in between this 10 to 1 or 2 o'clock kind of range. As you can see, I'm probably at that 1 o'clock right now. It's going to, of course, depend on the material, but you're going to ultimately set this to determine how big of a cut do you want? Do you want a very steep and aggressive cut, right? Like so, even though this is not necessarily doing that, you're obviously going to dial up a higher depth, right? But if you want a less aggressive cut, you're going to be going to the left, where it's not as noticeable. Now, next we have sharpness and selectivity, and these two are sort of intertwined in a way. But sharpness, I would relate to the Q on an EQ, right? A wide Q is going to affect more frequencies, and then a sharp Q is going to be a little bit more focused on a specific frequency. And this is obviously going to really depend, once again, on the material. If you have very specific problems on very specific frequencies, you're going to want to make it a lot more sharp, right? So that way, when it gets reduced, it's really just focusing on those problem spots. However, you may have a problem that's a little bit more wide, right? Sometimes sibilance transcends multiple frequencies, muddiness as well. Maybe it's a little bit in the 200 range and the 400 and a little bit of that 700-800. You may want to have a bit of a broader or less sharp type of setting in order to accomplish that, in order to reduce all of these things. But once again, the best way to think about this is just think about it like you would think of a Q on an EQ. Now, selectivity is sort of an extension of that, but it really is self-explanatory. It's how selective is this process? So is it going to focus on a lot of frequencies, right? So if it's less selective, it'll be focusing on more frequencies, right? It won't be as crazy about it. It'll just be sort of affecting a bunch of things. Whereas when it's really selective, it's really only going to focus on those problem spots once again. Now from there, we have some more typical dynamic processing type of parameters, being the attack and release. Most of you guys should be familiar with this by now, but attack is how fast the processing is going to react, and the release is how fast it lets go and lets it go back to a normal dynamic state. This is a dynamic processor, remember that, so it's more like a compressor than it is an EQ, I would suppose, right? But that being said, if you want more transparent types of settings, you want to probably set a slower attack. I actually have a faster one set up on this channel, but a slower attack might actually be a little bit more transparent because it's not going to immediately react, clamp down, and reduce the material. It's going to wait a little bit. It's going to be delayed a little bit before it takes the signal and reduces the volume, right? So slower attack is always a little bit more transparent sounding compared to a faster one. However, depending on the problem, you may want to have it be set fast once again. Now, release, I actually like having mine set to a fast release. That's what I have here as well. I want my material to go back to its original dynamic, uncompressed or unreduced state as quickly as possible because, again, it's going to sound transparent. Because if I have a slow release, what's going to happen is it's going to keep that potential problem, even when it's not completely reduced or at least lower than it's supposed to be at a dynamic level. That might be bad news, right? It might end up sounding compressed or just not natural in that capacity. So pretty straightforward stuff with the attack and release. Definitely the same things apply as we've talked about on some of my other compression videos. Now the quality, this is really where your oversampling is. I don't always oversample, but you definitely have the option to. I find sometimes it negatively impacts transients, but it's situational because at the same time, you are able to achieve a little bit more detail and clarity by having an oversampled signal. You can obviously see you have different options here, but just keep in mind it might create latency and CPU issues depending on what type of computer you are running. Now, resolution is a little bit more difficult to explain, but from what I understand, by putting it on a high or an ultra setting, you might ultimately achieve a smoother sounding process here. However, you might, similar to the oversampling, run into latency and CPU issues depending on how many instances of the plugin you have. From what I know, you're supposed to actually use these settings more so on buses and groups that are basically affecting multiple frequencies of multiple sounds, right? So if I have like a drum group, it might make sense to put it on there. Whereas right now I have it on an individual vocal track and I have it set to normal. Normal is usually my default setting as a heads up, but you do have the option to also put it into eco mode. Eco is a little bit more of a light type of mode where it's not going to be as CPU intensive. I'm sure that will actually Not necessarily sound as good as normal and beyond, but it might be worth doing if you want to have a lot of instances of this plugin in a session. Now, there is a sidechain option on this plugin, so I could set up a track to be received here in Pro Tools, and I could set it up so basically the reduction only takes place when the signal is happening. This is great for like live off the floor recordings. So as an example, if you had like a drum kit mic'd live off the floor and you have your, you're playing your snare drum and there's a little bit of hi-hat bleed, you can have the hi-hat trigger the reduction here on the specific range where the hi-hat is sort of bleeding into the snare. And what that'll ultimately do is it'll reduce the presence of the hi-hat in the snare channel. Hopefully that makes sense, but this is obviously an option you have. I don't always use it, but if you're somebody that's doing a lot of live off the floor recording and editing, it might be a great solution for you. Now, one of my favorite functions here is the mix function in the output section here. I actually look at the mix in a way sort of like a range. As you can see here, it says max reduction 3 dB. So that means even though I'm able to achieve a certain reduction here, and you can see how much potential I have to lose, even though I'm able to achieve that reduction, no matter what, it's going to basically cap it at 3. I'm not going to lose any more than 3 dB of volume at any given time on the problematic resonant frequencies. So even though I might dial in settings a specific way, I'm usually going to dial back the mix at some point to really achieve the more transparent sound. I find that if I always have things 100% wet in the mix, it's usually not going to sound that transparent. It sounds a little bit more aggressive than I would like, but by backing off on it here, I kind of get this double whammy where it sounds less aggressive, more transparent, and it also reduces the exact amount of gain reduction that's going to take place on these specific problems. Now, trim is self-explanatory. You want to add some volume or take it away, you can totally do that here. And bypass is another self-explanatory one, somewhat the same as using the bypass of the plugin, but I can just do it here internally if I would like. Just lets me hear what this sounds like without processing. Now, the delta, though, is a very interesting feature. And basically what the delta is, it's going to show me the difference between the wet and the dry signal. So basically what happens is when I put the delta in, it's letting me hear what I am losing. That is really how I like to think about it. So if I put it on right now and play, check this out.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind.
That's the part of the signal or the part of the frequencies that I'm losing. A lot of it does sound kind of phasey. You could tell it's just specific frequencies, specific problem spots that I'm ultimately taking care of. But it's just a good idea to reference in that and hear exactly what you're losing to make sure that you're focused on the right thing. I'm on a mono track, as you can see here. So I don't have access to any of these stereo settings, but this stuff's pretty straightforward. You can obviously put this into different modes, left, right, mid, side. You can link the channels and you could obviously pan things or pan the channel, I suppose. Here, you have the extra option to pan it here. A lot of this stuff, I don't find myself always using it. I mean, it might be cool to use the mid-side mode here and there, but I'm definitely not going to be panning stuff with this plugin. I'd rather just do that directly on my channel here. So overall, that's the global parameters of this plugin so far. But now if we want, you can actually look here and I can click into any of these frequencies and you can kind of see there's a few additional settings, and these settings are very much similar to a EQ, right? You have a frequency, you have a Q, but then you have a sensitivity, okay? Now, I know you might be seeing this and thinking, wow, this guy's just boosting some high end. That is not what's happening. Remember, this is more of a compression type of plugin, a dynamic plugin, more than it is an equalization plugin. And what I'm doing with this sensitivity is I'm actually increasing the sensitivity of this area. Okay, so what that means is by boosting this, it's actually going to make the reduction happen a little bit more aggressively only in this pocket, more so than these other frequencies that I haven't selected. Similarly, this filter, it's not actually filtering out the signal. What it's doing is it's telling the Soothe2 plugin to not necessarily process this area or reduce this area, and instead just focus on this frequency 450 and above. So 450 and above is what I want to reduce, and I especially want to reduce or treat this 6.6 kilohertz type of area. So ultimately what you're going to do here is any specific frequency ranges that are problematic, you're going to want to increase those to make sure that the plugin ultimately reduces them a little bit more aggressively, or maybe just more than it would normally if you hadn't increased the sensitivity at all. And you could, of course, do this selectively. I'm not always going to just do this for every single band. Sometimes I don't even do it at all, but I do find that I'm generally going to filter out a specific range on the low and the high, so we're very focused. As you can see, I got 450 to 16K fully isolated. So this part in between the two of them is what's being reduced. And I'm really accentuating this 6.6K to make sure that that area is also getting treated. Once again, depending on your sound, your signal, the thing that you're applying this to, you may want to approach this the same or differently. It's just going to really boil down to what part of your frequency is problematic. Maybe you want to actually treat more of the low end and more of the high end. You're not going to have as crazy of a cut as I do, right? Maybe you don't have a problem at 6.6K and instead your problem is more around 2K, you know? So you can obviously set that up instead. A lot of different ways to approach this, but all you got to understand is the sensitivity and how it affects the reaction. So now that I've said that, what I want to do is I want to just preserve my soothe. So I'm going to just move it over here and make it inactive. But I'm going to put a brand new instance of it on. We're going to just start from scratch. Now, of course, I know what I did, but let me actually just break down how I would approach this new for the first time. Now, of course, you see there already is some basic settings going on. And the amazing thing is there is a great bunch of presets here that you can go through. So if you have a vocal, you know, you may want to use this, whether it's a de-esser, which is what I like to use this for, or maybe you want to do something else. You want to put it on a bus. You can do that as well. Let's actually see how the first preset here, vocal de-esser, does. Okay, so you can see it's a very specific range here. You can see that there's a cutoff here at around 2.2. It's really accentuating 5,000 hertz, and then it's cutting off at 16K and above. So let's actually see what this sounds like, and I'll just focus on this exact same problem area that we were just in.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
This is actually reacting a little bit too aggressively. You can actually hear that my S's being treated the way that they are. It's starting to almost sound a little bit like a lisp, right? It's kind of taking things away and creating another problem, which is not good. We want this to sound natural. Now, I could play with some parameters here. For example, I could tweak this max reduction. That's the first thing I'm going to do.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all.
So really quickly, you can obviously tell that just by backing off on the mix, this sounds a lot more natural and less aggressive. It's kind of getting rid of that lisp issue that I was talking about. And I like that. I think this is a good thing. This is how I would personally approach using it. And if you want a quick start, you can literally just pull up a plugin, or pull up a preset, I should say, and dial in the mix and then adjust parameters as you see fit. Now let's do the opposite. Let's say that you actually wanted to just start from scratch. So I'll go to flat start. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just increase the depth to roughly 5 or 6. So that way I got a little bit of a more aggressive response. And I'm doing this because I first want to dial in the sound and just figure out how to actually get what I want to get out of it, okay? I'm going to leave it in soft mode because I want to make sure the sound's more transparent. And I don't think the issues present on this track are that big of a deal. It's more lightly touching things rather than aggressively making changes, right? But the sharpness, selectivity, everything else I'll leave for now. We'll maybe dial them in a little bit more aggressively after the fact. But first things first, I want to do a couple of things. One thing I want to do is I want to first set up a low cut, and I'm going to just press listen, and that's going to isolate just this sound, so we're only hearing this. And I'm actually going to just play this and sweep across with the frequency and try to basically isolate all of the frequencies that are not problematic, okay? So a lot of this low-end stuff is not the problem for me here. We're trying to treat the high-end harshness, right? If you are trying to treat low-end, you'll still want to do this, but maybe you're not going to push it as aggressively. You're going to push it to a point where you start to hear your problem and then back off. I'm going to do the same here, but I'm focusing on the high-end. So with that in mind, let me just play this real quick and start to dial this in.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So somewhere around here seems pretty good because obviously up top here we're getting more of that S action and we're losing more of that. You can hear it, whereas down here this is more of the low frequencies. We're not really hearing that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'll click another band. Let's do the top one here, this orange one. And if I press listen again, you're going to obviously see we're focused here. And I'm going to keep the band roughly as wide as it is. And I'm going to just sweep around and try to find exactly where the S's are, where that exact problem is. Here we go.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. these days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all.
So this is a good starting point, but I think it's a little bit too narrow. I think we need to open up the cue a little bit and affect some more of the top and bottom kind of areas here, because I think that S is sort of transcending more than just what I'm focused on. So I'm going to do that real quick.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So somewhere like that, you can hear obviously what we're losing, right? And I'm pretty sure when I put this into context right now, which I'll do in a moment, you're going to hear that this is too aggressive overall, right? I'm sure the depth is a little bit too crazy and all that, but just check this out. I'll play you where we're at.
I don't care what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all.
So as you can see, it's obviously too aggressive, like I said. It's creating some artifacts. I'm hearing some clickiness and all that. Definitely don't want that. This is too much, right? But we need to do this to first set it up. Now, before I continue, let's just do the high band. So I'll put a high cut. I'm going to press listen. Let me maybe make the cue a little bit higher. And here we go.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
All right, so roughly got that as well. So we've sort of focused it now, as you can tell. And now back to this band. Let me maybe dial back the depth so that it's not reacting as aggressively, but then I might ultimately increase the sensitivity depending on what we end up with.
And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So overall, I'm getting a pretty aggressive reaction, even still, even after backing up on the depth. This is going to be something that I'm going to address later with the mix. First things first, let me actually just dial back the attack.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So right away, just changing the attack, making it slower, you see we're getting a much slower reaction. It's sounding a little bit more natural, right? This is obviously what we want. Now I want to just focus on the sharpness and selectivity, maybe adjust these two parameters.
Problem is I don't care what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So I find it sounds a little bit more natural with a higher selectivity, a little bit more selective, so to speak. Whereas when I go lower, you get a little bit more of the artifacts and stuff that I don't like, right? Now that being said, now that we've adjusted this and the attack, I'm going to leave the release. I think it's pretty good where it is. I want to just dial the depth back up a little bit more now, because now obviously we're getting a slightly different reaction. And now I think we could use a little bit more of a reduction in the process.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
So now we're starting to really get it, right? It's starting to sound a lot more natural and better. And I think I'm actually pretty cool with this. I mean, I might be able to push the depth a little bit harder, to be honest. But let me leave this as is and just dial the mix back, and let's just maybe A/B the difference from there.
And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
it's getting close, and you see me adjusting parameters to try to obviously make this a little bit better, you know? I'm going to take the Q down here so I can see it's giving a little bit of a boost. Just feeling it's sounding a little bit unnatural still. Let's try this.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side.
And that's sounding a lot better, you know? I still think there's a little bit more work to do to massage this, and Soothe is not the end-all, be-all. This is not something that I use on every single channel to solve this specific problem, and if you are somebody who's experiencing harsh vocals, I absolutely recommend that you check out my video, How to Fix Harsh Vocals. I'll leave a link to it up above and in the description below. But that video is going to show you a bunch of solutions to treating this specific problem, but Soothe is one thing that you can use, as I'm using here, to help remedy this a little bit, right? It's going to do it a little bit more transparently, perhaps, or a little bit more intelligently than just a static EQ move or a dynamic compressor like a multi-band compressor that might reduce a whole bunch of frequencies equally in a specific range where only certain frequencies are the actual problem. Either way, I definitely think looking at this plugin is worth it. I definitely think it is a plugin that's worthwhile for sure. I definitely use it a lot more on individual tracks as you see me using here, but it definitely gets rotation on groups, on buses, and not really on masters, but I'm sure you could put it on there if you have a very specific issue that you need to address. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please smash that like button. I'd really appreciate that because it'll not only help this channel do better and reach more people like yourself, but it'll help the YouTube algorithm know to show you more of my content. And like I said, I drop a ton of videos all the time exactly like this, super in-depth and focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. I appreciate y'all for watching. If you want to see anything in a future video, definitely leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one. All right? Peace.
5,